Hi, chess fans. We are looking at an amazing game played in 1978 between Anatoly Karpov with white and Viktor Korchnoi with black. This was during the World Championship match, and the two players had already played 7 games, all of which were a draw, and this is round 8. And let's see what happens. Anatoly played e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle takes, d4, b5, bishop e3, d5, takes, bishop e6, knight bd2, knight c5, c3, g6, queen e2, bishop g7. So far so good, all relatively standard stuff. And in this position here, Anatoly Karpov played the amazing move knight to d4. And have a quick look at this position. Doesn't white just hang a pawn? Yeah, black could take here and then everything is fine. But doesn't white just give up this pawn? This pawn is now unprotected only by the queen. Korchnoi says, yes, give me the pawn. And black is up a pawn. So what is the idea here? Karpov played f4. Okay, so what is the idea behind this move? So obviously this move is attacking the knight, so the knight has to move. Moves here to an active square. And the idea is f5. The bishop e6 is pinned, the king hasn't castled yet, and the pawn is attacking the bishop, so black has to take, which weakens black's pawn structure significantly. And after knight takes, black has 6 pawns, white has 5 pawns, so white is a pawn down. But the knight is coming in with a tempo attacking the bishop. So the rook protects. And Karpov continues with the very instructive move, knight takes c4, exchanging a piece. And the famous saying goes, important are the pieces, not the pieces that are exchanged, but the pieces that remain on the board. So an active knight gets exchanged, but also more diagonals are opened for white's pieces. So after this exchange here, the game continued bishop to c2. And have a look at this position. So white is a pawn down. White has sacrificed a pawn, if you will. But what are the imbalances in this position, other than the material difference? How do you evaluate the potential for activity for white's pieces and for black's pieces? So the bishop is pinned, this bishop is attacked, and the rook is tied to defending it. This rook is still not in the game, and this knight here can go here, but it's not an active square, and it cannot go here because this square is controlled by the queen and the bishop. The king is pinned and in the center of the board, so literally, with the exception of the queen, maybe all of black's pieces are actually very bad. Whereas the bishop reigns on the diagonal. This bishop can come in, the rooks can come in quickly. The queen is eyeing towards the king, the knight is dangerously close to the king. So basically it's quite amazing. I mean, after black takes this pawn, this is a relatively forced move, and playing the knight here is pretty straightforward. This is a forcing move. Yeah, pinning the bishop, so black has to take. Protecting the bishop. So this is all very simple moves and relatively forced, but basically we get to a position where white, for the pawn, basically has such a great compensation. All the pieces are active, and all of black's pieces are not active. So let's have a look, because it's super interesting, I mean, if you are a lower rated player, you might think, okay, so yeah, I get this, but if I get a position like this in a game and I play against a stronger opponent, the opponent makes a few moves and then suddenly his pieces are active and I couldn't take advantage of the activity of my pieces. And so it's very instructive actually to look at this game and see how Karpov transforms the activity of his pieces into a win. And basically every move that he makes, we can look at it and learn from it how we should play in a situation where we have active pieces and our opponent doesn't. And to do that, it's important next to the active pieces to recognize that what this game here is really all about, what this position is all about, is the fact that the black king is in the center. While white kings is relatively safe, black king is super weak. So let's have a look at and learn from Karpov how he's doing this. So game continued, knight to d3. Black is essentially giving back a pawn because Korchnoi is seeing the situation and he's basically trying to close some lines here. He's trying to close off this bishop, he's trying to close off this rook coming in and this line being open. And Karpov brings in the bishop that is not blocked. The bishop was also attacked by the knight. And attacking this bishop here with a tempo. If bishop takes, the knight comes in and attacks the rook. And one defender, namely this bishop here, one piece that is close to the king would have been exchanged. With a tempo, because the rook is attacked. Okay, so bringing in an attacker with tempo. Black drops back the bishop, so that if white takes now, it at least doesn't come in with a tempo. Or probably king takes instead. The game continued rook 81. So the bishop not only came in with a tempo, but it also cleared up the line, which pins this knight. Okay, centralizing the queen and now winning back the pawn. So the knight was trying to block off the pieces, but actually it's winning a pawn again with tempo on the queen. So Karpov is basically, as compared to here, he has activated these two pieces here. This is what happened in this operation. And he has done so in a way that many of the moves came with the tempo, which means black has to react and couldn't activate his pieces in the meantime. So he was probably looking at several possibilities and then choosing these moves because they're coming in with tempo. Okay, in this position, another interesting principle comes in. Karpov exchanges a defender, i.e. a piece that is close to the king. And after this interim check, black takes. Again, it's about the pieces that remain on the board. White still has super active pieces, and black's pieces are still passive. The king position is weak, but the exchanges have been favoring white because defenders have been removed. If, for example, this rook was gone, and this bishop was gone, and let's say white has the queen and the knight, this would all be good exchanges because these pieces here are not participating and in the defense, and then the knight and the queen are enough to mate the king. Okay, game continued, queen to f3. So this is very, very interesting because in this position, after the exchange of the pieces and the passivity of these pieces, white is playing yet another move to put the queen on a better attacking square and posing a threat at the same time, so another tempo move. And in this position here, the advantage of the activity of the pieces, which has been continuously building up, is almost overwhelming already. So the rook is attacked, so the rook has to move. And let's have a look, where should the rook move? Queens, and it turns out rook to c8 loses immediately because white's tactical threats that derive from the activity of his pieces are already so overwhelming. White plays queen to h5, threatening queen h6 check. And let's say black doesn't react to this threat and just plays a move. Check, king to e8, takes and attacking the rook has to move, bringing in the rook to the attack and pinning the bishop. This rook cannot move, the king cannot move, this rook can also not move, so basically it's already almost a Zugzwang position. Let's say the queen moves here, queen to h4, proposing a threat of mate, blocking with the f6 pawn, repeating the threat of mate, blocking with the rook, check, check, and mate. Okay, so wow, in this position here, if black doesn't pay attention and plays rook c8, the position already falls apart because of this threat here. The weakness on the dark squares, there's no defender of the dark squares anymore. The dark squared bishop has been exchanged, and now all of these dark squares around the king are weak. So what we can actually learn is that this maneuver of bringing in the bishop here to exchange the dark squared bishop weakens actually all these squares around the king. And the fact that the king has been pulled in highlights these weaknesses. And so attacking the rook, if rook c8, bringing the queen onto the dark squares is a way of taking advantage of this situation. Okay, so in this position, black could also defend the rook with the queen. But this also loses immediately because white also has the resource knight to h6, attacking the rook. And if the rook moves up, also to protect the square here, white can bring the queen in here, kind of like eyeing the rook, but also threatening to bring in the rook here with a check, so the queen has to block this. Now attacking this rook here, so the rook has to take. And in this position, the interim take with the queen, which is losing, because if the rook, for example, drops back to protect, check, mate. Okay, and if instead rook f3, trying to hold things together, I mean, this is now a forced mate as well. So protecting with the queen doesn't work because of knight h6, opening up the route again to the dark squares for the queen. And on the dark squares, the rook gets to invade. So that also doesn't work. So in this position, what if, let's say, black decides, okay, I'm going to give up this rook and just eat some pieces as well. You know, I don't care about the rook, give me the knight, give me the rook. This also doesn't work because check, not check, but putting the queen to an active square, which basically means if black takes, attacking the rook and the bishop, check, 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 mate. Okay, so that also doesn't work. So you can see all these motives on the dark squares are making it really hard for black to find a move. And the best move is actually probably rook b8, but this also loses. Okay, again, knight h6 idea, attacking the rook and the pawn, bringing the queen in, same thing. Now black at least has the move queen to c6, bringing in the queen here. After takes, the queen come in here to defend. But black has again rook g3, and after takes, the knight is coming to f5, threatening two mates or through two attacks here, winning material. And if bishop to d5, offering to exchange the queens and also eyeing this pawn here, white can actually exchange the queens and then has this attack with the rook. And here the attack continues because white is threatening to win the rook here with a check. So the rook has to come up, which basically makes white win another pawn. And after this exchange, white is up 2 pawns in the rook ending. So this is also winning. So crazy. So basically in this position here, the weaknesses on the dark squares and all of these active pieces have been transformed into a situation where suddenly all the tactics work. Okay, so to go from to go from this position here, where you have your active pieces, basically exchanging the right pieces, especially the dark square bishop, opening up files and choosing ways to activate your pieces with tempo up until this move queen f3 creates a situation where suddenly all the tactics work for you. And then you can just calculate and you will find a winning combination. Okay, in this position the game continued actually rook to e8, and now beautiful tactic. Again, this knight h6 motive, attacking the rook moves up, so it doesn't get taken, and protecting this pawn. It makes sense. The game continued rook to d7, threatening to take here on this pawn. And if bishop takes, we simply have this mate. Okay, so the bishop cannot take. And if, let's say, black just ignores everything, again we have this mate. So black has to move the rook away to create this escape square for the king, but this still allows knight takes, and after bishop takes the rook, white has the nice discovered check like this, and if the king moves here, it's mate. If the rook goes in between, it's mate, obviously. And if the king moves up, it's also mate. So finishing the game in style, after knight to d8, Korchnoi resigned and Karpov was winning. So very, very interesting example of, let's go back to the critical moment, the genius pawn sacrifice, in this position, inviting black to take this pawn, all the while having this idea of shattering this pawn structure, and then all these pieces will be kind of active. The king is in the middle, and all these pieces have a very active potential. All the white pieces have the potential to become very active, while the black pieces are passive. Recognizing this and sacrificing the pawn, amazing understanding of the position. For sure Karpov didn't calculate all of these variations, but for sure he entered this by just seeing maybe a position like this and evaluating that he will be better, much better than the pawn he gave up, because of the potential of activity for his pieces. So I hope this was helpful and we could learn from Karpov's play. Again, this was a world championship match, Korchnoi and Karpov, so really chess at the highest level. Korchnoi, very strong player, but Karpov really showed us how to take advantage of the situation, and we can replay the game and learn from it. So thanks again, and thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye.